Thanks, Roger, once more, and at the same time, welcome Sanya Goel. Please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay. So my name is Sanjay Goel. I'm a professor and a researcher of cybersecurity. And it certainly is a great privilege to come and speak in front of this audience, and I want to thank the organizers for that. Now, I have a completely different mold than most people in this room. I'm a technical person, a security person. I come from the hacking world, not really the diplomatic world. So it's an anti-diplomatic world which I come from. But I'm very happy to speak to you all. I've learned a little bit of diplomacy just through osmosis, learning from people, like my mentor here, Raphael. And my talk today is going to focus on a very technical issue of attribution and digital forensics and how it is going to impact the future of security or cybersecurity in more specificity. If you look at the world today, cybersecurity is a big issue. Internet is completely weaved around us. No matter how much we try, we can't escape it. We also know that in the last 30 years of the internet, we have not been able to deliver a trustworthy internet. And most people think it's a technical problem. Yes, it is a technical problem. The problem is not because the security experts have not worked hard. The problem is not because we have not made progress, but we have shifted the paradigm of information technology continuously. So today we stand here, we've developed over the last 20 years an impregnable fortress of defense around every network in firewalls and IDSs. However, only to find out that all that is rendered completely useless. And so that's what I'm going to talk about, what we need to do today, what the state of cybersecurity is, and where we are lacking, and where we need to move forward. So if you look at the technology that we face today, the internet is getting complex, more and more complex. The actors and the perpetrators of attacks have been different compared to the last 20 years. And insiders have become as much of a threat as people outside. So given these paradigm shifts, we need to change our game. And this speaks directly to security analytics and digital forensics, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I want to very simply explain what digital forensics means. It's a big term, but the implications are very simple. Collecting all the data together, putting it on a common timeline, and making inferences on the data to answer some of the questions, including attribution. That's what digital forensics is. It's a little bit complex, but the basic paradigm is very simple. So I want to show you how the world has changed in the last 20 years in terms of cybersecurity and the hacking world through a series of attacks that have happened. So most of the attacks that we heard about was the opportunistic attacks, where people would find and exploit weaknesses in the systems wherever they could, find whatever they could steal and walk away with it. That is no longer true. Let's roll back to December 2009 and see the attacks. The Operation Aurora, it was targeted towards 31 major corporations in the United States, including Google and including Adobe. The goal of that really was to basically steal the software and be able to track the dissidents from China. And China was blamed for orchestrating the attack, and nobody could prove it, though. Look at the second attack. It lasted for about 8 years, 2006 to 2014. It was called the Unit 61398 attack. If you don't know what that unit is, it's a secret unit in China, which is affiliated with the Chinese government, which launches attacks. 141 companies in 20 different industries were attacked. And the goal in this case was to steal trade secrets from nuclear plants to basically proprietary information about future plans of large companies like Westinghouse, GE, and whatnot. moving forward, that is not the only perpetrator. This again was attributed to China. We go further to Operation Cleaver. In this time, what we had was Iran trying to flex its muscle and trying to get into the critical infrastructure of other countries. And they were able to basically launch attacks in many, many countries, including Netherlands, Canada, UK, and the US, in a lot of different defense and oil companies. And so that really showed that Iran had come at par with China in terms of hacking capability. And closer to home and much more recent, let's look at the two attacks. The Office of Public Management attack, which was the office which holds a lot of security clearance information of the United States, that was hacked. And the attack lasted for 1 full year before it was detected. And what they took in this case was the security clearance information of a lot of people, about more than 20 million people. And that's a lot of the intel environment in the United States. Fortunately, the CIA has its own system, so CIA was not involved in this attack, unlike what a lot of people believe. It was mainly people who worked for the State Department and other agencies. Now, why would somebody need this information? Mainly to recruit spies. That's why this information is useful. A lot of people, after their information was disclosed, it's made them difficult to travel to certain countries. And more recently, look at the DNC attacks. What happened in this case? The attack was during the 2016 campaign, where the email servers for the Democratic National Committee were hacked, and about 60,000 emails were stolen and later displayed on WikiLeaks. The malware used to steal the DNC emails was similar to that used against the German parliament in 2015, an attack that the German parliament blamed on Russia. So after this attack, we are still quibbling over who actually launched the attacks, who was responsible, who orchestrated it, and what influence it had on the US elections. So what is common across all of these attacks? The common across all of these attacks is that the game has changed. The opportunistic attacks are gone. We had built the impregnable fortress around all the computer systems to prevent people from breaking in. But that's easily cracked. How did they crack it? By using social phishing attacks, right? By using social engineering attacks, and by compromising any vulnerability. Remember, this is an asymmetric problem. The defenders have to defend millions of soft targets, whereas the attackers just need to exploit one target to be able to break into the system. So how are these attacks happening, right? Instead of just coming in and then leaving, now the hackers are there to stay. If you're going to look at the previous attacks which I talked to you about, they lasted, or most of them lasted over a year. So what is happening? Once the hackers break in once into an organization, they are there to stay. They linger on, keep lurking, and then they become insiders in the organization and slowly claw their way to the targeted information. I think that's where the challenge is. So what weakness are we talking about here? The weakness is the weakness in being able to detect these attacks. And that's where our forensics has failed, and that's where our security analytics has failed. So if you look at the security paradigm, we were controlling the perimeter. Perimeter is no longer where we need to protect. We need to move into the core. Attacks are inevitable. Breaches are inevitable. People are going to breach into any system that you create just because we have to use it and people have to use it. So the issue today is how can we protect the core of the institution rather than just focusing on the perimeter? And that's where forensics and security analytics comes. We need to be able to gain more visibility into the networks, which are getting more and more complex. Organizations have no idea who's coming in, if a fraud is being committed, what's happening. What we discover, what's published in the press, is just the tip of the iceberg, maybe 5% of everything that is happening on the internet. And we are lacking a total visibility into our own networks today, and that's the challenge. All the hacks that we have seen, some of them OPM and whatnot, yes, the security was weak, but that does not mean we were defenseless. Everything that we needed to do at the perimeter was there. We just did not have the visibility inside. So that's where digital forensics comes in. And so that's what I'm professing. The other thing that we need to look at is there is total confusion in who is behind all of these attacks, right? The diplomats come out and claim specific countries are behind a specific attack, they give them attribution. But in the long run, to find out that the technical experts are poo-pooing that, well, we cannot have 100% attribution. That is absolutely true. Given the anonymity of the internet, 100% attribution is never going to be possible, or in most cases not going to be possible without having intelligence on the ground. But do we need to still rely on 100% intelligence or 100% accuracy? We can't afford to rely on 100% accuracy. We need to normalize this. We need to find out what is an acceptable level of evidence to assign attribution. Going after 100% in an anonymous internet is not going to be possible. That's where diplomacy comes in. So I spent my first 5 years, I've been in the security field for the last 15 years. I spent the first 5 years thinking that technology was the only problem, just to realize that humans are a bigger problem than technology. And I started working on the human problem for the next 5 years, only to realize that humans and technology are alone not sufficient. We need to have policies and procedures in place and diplomacy in place to prevent the international attacks. And so that's what I'm here to recommend, that we need to work together as a combination of multiple streams of the same problem. Diplomacy, the human problem, and the technical problem alone, none of them is going to succeed. So OSCE has done a commendable job on cyber diplomacy by initiating the process of confidence-building measures and building consensus on the initial set of measures. Two of the architects of that are sitting right in front of me, and Ben and Nino, my good friends. The UNGPG is moving in parallel with their efforts and confidence-building measures. They've made some progress. The confidence-building measures that have come so far are just the beginning. To really give it teeth, to be able to move further, we need to build trust in the confidence-building measures. We need to make sure there is commensurate verification, and so that people can build trust. Now, if you look at what's happening today, nations are rife with suspicion of each other, right? They have clearly designated cyber as a new frontier of warfare, along with ground, air, sea, and space. Nations have little information about each other's cyber capabilities, right? But there is just mutual suspicion. So each country is engaged in developing a very, very strong arsenal. Every country is trying to hire people. Look at China, Russia, the US, Iran. Everybody is trying to gain strategic advantage. So we are in a real cyber arms race, and a part of the reason is that we don't have enough visibility into each other's networks, into each other's capabilities. Unless we get that visibility, we are never going to be able to build that trust. So confidence-building measures are going to slow down unless we have a way of building this trust and verification among nations. That's, again, where security analytics comes in. So what I propose today is that while the confidence-building measures are continuing on and are moving ahead, we need to, in parallel, start to address this problem, maybe in a separate body, which is more technical, to try to address the need for defining the evidentiary standards for cyber incidents. Perhaps a cyber incident monitoring exchange under the auspices of the OSCE or the UN to independently assess incidents, rather than relying on specific country intelligence agencies to go ahead and say, well, A, B, and C attacked me, or X, Y, and Z attacked me. We need to have a central way, a more definable way, a more trustable way of figuring out who the real attackers are, rather than making it a political gimmick. We need to clearly lay out the processes for establishing attribution and acceptable evidentiary standards. What are the acceptable evidentiary standards? We need to do that. We need to define standards for requesting data from involved parties and countries and make it mandatory for the countries to supply the data based on a treaty so that it can be independently examined and verified. And without doing that, we're not going to move forward. And so this is just the beginning of what we need to do. Because if we don't do that, the progress that we had so far desired from the internet, the progress that we have made, is going to come to a halting stop. Without trust in the internet, we cannot move forward. There's a lot of hype around the importance of cybersecurity right now, just like any other field which is hyped up, right? But it is going through its hype cycle. I think it's already past its hype cycle when people are realizing its true importance, and it's going to come down to size. But if you look at the future, the three most important technological innovation that we're going to make in the next decade, they're going to be relying on the internet. The connected vehicles, when we will have self-driving cars, or at least collision avoidance systems in cars, the smart grid, where the entire power network is going to be covered with an information technology grid so that we can have more resilience in the grid and make it more efficient and allow for a marketplace of energy exchange. And the third is the human body, where we'll have more and more implantable devices which are controlled through network and communication. Given the three of them, so far we have not had physical losses, people dying from the breaches of security in the internet or network paradigms. But look at the next 20 years. If people were to break into connected vehicles and reverse the collision avoidance systems and cause collisions, people can die. If people can break into the electricity grid and are able to dismantle the infrastructure internally, it can cause severe consequences for health and safety of the humans. And thirdly, the human body. You will see more and more devices, the heart implants, the insulin implants, all being controlled externally. We have tested in our own lab that we can break into some of these systems. And if we don't bring security to the fore, if we don't understand what's going on, we are going to face the consequences in real human casualties related to cyber incidents. And I think before something like that happens, we need to start thinking more seriously about it. Typically, we don't really work on these problems until we have seen a mass casualty when everybody's conscience and awareness is raised. It's time to act before something like that happens. So, again, following Raphael's wisdom here, I want to end on a positive note. Where we are today, the reason cybersecurity is important, because we have made so much progress with the internet, and the internet has become an integral part of our life for the better. There are solutions to this. We need to understand that this is a fast-moving and a fast-changing world around the internet. We need not have the dogmatic view of the policies and procedures that we have had previously. We need to think out of the box. We need to think clearly and critically and move forward, assuming that this is a life force that is a necessity for the civilization. Thank you all for the nice reception here, and I look forward to speaking to you all sometime again. Thank you very much.